guys, it's SJ. If you're brand new here, my name's SJ, which isn't the most inventive, blame my mum and dad, short for Sarah Jane, and I'm a baby name consultant and baby name expert. Basically, I spend a lot of my time researching names and helping people come up with names, and one of the #1 requests we get at the Baby Name Consultancy is how to honour a loved one. So we call these kind of tribute names. We actually call them on the community loving nods, because the main thing we've realised is that most people want to honour a loved one who's passed, or a living relative who just means a lot to them is more of a common trend as well. And this is, I say a trend, but it is obviously a very traditional way of naming. People would pass names through families, and sometimes we have married couples and it's the partners, one partner's side is the tradition to always name the babies after a particular family member, and a lot of modern couples really want to put their own spin on it. I think we feel a little bit robbed of the opportunity to name our baby, our child, ourselves when there's such a strong tradition in the family, but we want to honour the tradition, but we want to come up with our own way of doing it. So that's what I'm going to give you some tips on today, and then I'm also going to share with you some recent consultations that I've done doing just that, so you can hear how it works in practice. So follow along, hit subscribe if you love all things baby names, do share this with a friend who is honouring a loved one, and if you want to ask me how to honour a loved one, pop their name in the comment section below and I will get through them all during the week. So the first tip when it comes to using a tribute name is to look at the name meaning. It might be really obvious, but sometimes we sort of forget to do it, and so really simply put in the name, see what it means, and you might come up with then a name that has the same meaning but is much more your vibe and your style, and that is very much of a tribute. So there are some gorgeous names that have beautiful meanings that are really obvious. So things like Margaret, you can do Margot, or you can even do Pearl because it means pearl, or you might have a less obvious name. So a name like Robert is a name that's really kind of out of style. Sorry if you've got a baby Robert, but it's just sort of going down in popularity. It's declining, but it's a very popular name for the older generation. So when you think about a name like that, it actually means bright fame, which is a really beautiful meaning, and there are so many names meaning bright or star. One I absolutely love is the name Beacon. So it's a little bit different, but it uses the B and the E from Robert, and it means that bright light. And I think that that name really does the job of tribute and honour, because it's taking that light that they shared as well. So have a look at the name meaning and see if there's either something more literal, or then search that name meaning again, names meaning. I have millions of name lists here. I'm sure you'll find something on my channel as well. And that's a really great way of finding a unique name. Secondly, use a nickname. That's probably the most obvious one, but you know, if you're thinking about it, you can use some vintage names. Names like Albert really lend themselves to an Albie or a Bertie, and is why we're seeing that vintage nickname trend really soar. It is because of this tribute name trend. So recently we had somebody who had, their dad was called Melvin, and we recommended the name Vinny as a way of tributing Melvin. We could have something more difficult like an Angela, and there's lovely names like Gigi. Those sort of nicknames names also really popular, where you're just using the sound. They're so modern, like you know, BBs, GGs, BBs, all of it going on, and GG's really lovely. Or even just using the end and doing like an Eleanor and extending it, so using the sounds from the end. So when you're looking at a nickname, you can look at the sounds and the letters and try to blend it to make something much more modern and much more you. Or you can use the letters. This is what I love to do most. I don't know why, maybe it's just such an interesting way of doing it. When you see the name written down rather than how it sounds, other name combinations can pop out at you. So for example, you could have a Cassandra, which is a really kind of common name but not so fashionable, but it could become Andy for a girl, using the middle, which I absolutely love, is so on trend, but very obviously a tribute to a Sandra when you look at it like that. Or you could have like a Brian, and you're like, oh, do I have to start with a B? You sort of go towards the more obvious sounds, but you could use the middle and have an Ari, which means lion, and is a really cool name, cool Hebrew name. So there's tons of ways of doing it. Those are my 3 top tips and how I approach it when I'm going to work with a client on it. So if you have a name, pop it below and help each other out. You guys are so good at naming, so help each other out and have a go on a few yourself as well in the comment section. So recently we had the name Gillian, which is really interesting name. Somebody wants to honour a Gillian but isn't mad on the name, doesn't really want to go with Jill either. Gillian actually came from the god Jove, who is also known as Jupiter. So suddenly you're into this whole other literal realm of names. So you could go with Jovi, which means joyful, and it's really lovely. It sounds similar enough to Gillian, but actually comes from the root of the name. So it's so perfect as a tribute. You could almost do like a rhyming name, like a Vivian. So you've got Gillian and then you've got Vivian, and it sounds very similar. So using very similar sounds, the same rhythm, and it could be as a tribute name. You can obviously do Gigi, which I just talked about for Gillian, which is a really, really simple way of doing it. Or taking the two L's and doing the name trick or the letter trick, because it's like cheating at Wordle. You could do the name Ellaria, which is so pretty, so on trend, looks really similar to Gillian. Ellaria, so pretty. And it means cheerful, which often would be, you know, for doing a tribute name for somebody, it's also nice to look at their characteristics as well, and, you know, really, really lovely ways of playing around with the name, simple name like Gillian. Because somebody writing that their mum's name was Paula, and the mum didn't like her own name, didn't want her own name passed on, which is also quite common. Don't call her Paula, pick something of her own. But the daughter really wants to somehow bring her mum into it. So we looked again at kind of similar names. So how about the name something like Aurora? So it's using the AU and the strong sound from Paula, but again, a much more modern name, meaning goddess of the dawn. Or even Aurelia. Again, all of those names really work perfect for a Paul or a Paula, because obviously you can honour, tribute a Paul with a girl name as well. So sometimes actually when you play around with the gender of it, it suddenly opens up a whole new world again. I also liked Paloma as an alternative to Paula, which means dove and peace, which is absolutely gorgeous. Or simply Orla, the Irish name. I do think that Paula and Orla, that's very much of a tribute name, maybe more for somebody who's passed on, because if you've got Paula and Orla together in the family, it might get complicated, but really fun name that suddenly sounds really, really modern. Had a client who had grandparents called Norbert and Rita. I was actually like, you've got to go with Norbert because it is so adorable. But I get, she didn't want Norbert, she didn't want Bertie. So there's some fun ways of putting the names, even putting the names together. You could do Nori, which is a really popular name at the moment. It is a food name. It is like a Japanese name for the sushi type of seaweed, Nori, but such a gorgeous name. Then you're putting both their names together, even if you used it in the middle spot, so sweet. And the names mean north and bright. So you could do something like Nova, which is a really trendy name at the moment, meaning a bright star, like a supernova, basically the star that shines the brightest in the sky, which is a gorgeous name for a baby and a gorgeous way of honouring Norbert and Rita with Nova and using their name meanings together. Katie's dad is called Alan, and she's like, I really want to do a tribute name, but I'm not into the name Alan. So a couple of alternatives we had. One was Alden, A-L-D-E-N, very similar to Alan looking, a really obvious tribute. It means dear friend or old friend. So again, I loved the meaning of it when you're doing a tribute name. Or use it for a daughter, and then you suddenly got Alana, which is very different, or even Alanis, which I love the name Alanis. I talk about it all the time. Yes, like Alanis Morissette, but I think it's a beautiful name and a great way of bringing your dad's name through the family. Isabel wrote in, this was all on Instagram. If you want to follow me on Instagram, you can. I would love that. See you over there. She had her grandparents or her parents who was trying to honour a Kelvin and a Christine, and she was totally stuck. She wanted to honour them somewhere in the name and have some sort of tribute to them, but hated both the names. So Kelvin actually means river, and she hadn't looked that up, and I was like, well, what about the name River? It's such a great name and a great way of honouring a Kelvin for boy or girl, and she was really happy with that name. Or for Christine, I think anything that ending in that T-I-N-E is really easy just to take the ending of the name. So we looked at Clementine, which is not the teen, it's the time. So it's quite a name that's quite often mispronounced, but you've got Clementine for a Christine, and it works really, really well. Or even taking the end and doing like a Stina, making it a tiny bit longer. So Stina is a nickname for Christina, but really, really works really well. Jessica is looking for a tribute name for Denise. One of those names that's kind of definitely gone out of style again. So there's two ways we took this in depending on what her personal style was. So you could use the ending, which is really pretty, and do like an Eloise. So Denise is quite strong, but then if you're using the ending is really emphasized. We did Eloise or Annalise or something like that. So just using the end as a really lovely tribute to a Denise, or using the beginning, which is a little bit more of a stronger sound. We looked at the name Devin, which means poet, which is really, really lovely for bringing the D and the E in. in. Well, I really loved the idea of using Enid for a Denise. So taking those letters again, so looking at it on paper is such a good way of finding a new name. So we're literally sort of doing an anagram of Denise, but using Enid, which means life or breath. So again, a perfect meaning for a tribute name. Okay, last up was the names Daniel and David. Really, really common names. I've actually got David in the middle of my firstborn son's name. Daniel's an interesting one because you can make it longer. So you can do Nathaniel and take the end, which makes it very, very different. Then you've got the nickname Nate rather than the nickname Dan, if it just feels a little bit boring, dull, don't know. Nathaniel with Nate is a really, really lovely one. You can even do Dane as a one syllable. It's a bit Dane Bowers. Do you remember Dane Bowers? It's a blast from the past, but it means Danish. But I actually really like it. There are one syllable names of boys are really popular, particularly in the middle. So if you had a longer first name, you could just put Dane in the middle as a nod to a David or a Daniel. You could do Donovan, so blending the two names together with the N from Danny and the V from David. We did Donovan, which I really like again as a sort of surname as first name. Actually quite popular at the moment, a little bit hipster still, but I really liked it. And the last one I did was very, very simple, which is what I would have used, which is Davy. So just changing it to Davy, which I think is so cool. It's very like outdoorsy vibes, like Davy Crockett, like it works a bit better for me. So that is kind of my top tips on how to get a tribute name right. Some ways of doing it and some examples. I hope you found it interesting. Obviously at the moment we are mourning Queen Elizabeth, so I've been talking a lot about names to honour Elizabeth, names like Elspeth, the Scottish form of Elizabeth. We're seeing names like even Winnie for Windsor coming up, or even Rain for boys, and we're talking about making a tribute name, a loving nod to maybe our new king. Traditionally a lot of babies would have been named after the new king, Charles III. So it's a really interesting and important tradition within naming. I hope you've enjoyed the video. As I said, ask me anything below. You can check out my podcast all around loving nods to people, which I will link below as well, and there's loads more dilemmas there. If you're interested in becoming a baby name consultant with me, that is still coming. Thank you everyone who's already emailed me. I will leave the link below to email me if you're interested in that, and I will see you on my next video. Bye guys.